everyone. My name is Dr. Liz Burton-Crow. I'm the Director of Education for the Carrillo Center for Nonviolence. Welcome back to Living One, our free monthly webinar series where presenters from around the world share their vision about psychology, life, and culture in the absence of animal exploitation. Through Living One, we attempt to answer the question, we know it's wrong, but what does right look like? Today, we're welcoming Nigel Osborne, Executive Director of egg-truth.com. Nigel has years of experience related to animal rights and online advocacy. He personally supports a variety of organizations, including farm sanctuaries, animal rescue organizations, and animal rights groups. Nigel's extensive background in the publishing, outdoor advertising, printing, and web design industries over the last 25 years provides him with a strong creative acumen and business management experience. Through egg-truth.com and its social media channels, Nigel seeks to increase awareness among the public about global egg production and expose the conditions for the billions of hens condemned to laying every year. So thank you so much for being here, Nigel.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, of course. And interviewing Nigel today is going to be our very own Dr. Gabe Bradshaw.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. And Nigel is, I think, our second north of the border cousin to participate in this show. So thank you so much for making us diverse.
Very happy to be here.
Nigel, we usually kind of open up, or I usually open up with asking the guest speaker to reflect on their own arc in terms of how they got to where they are in the sense of their life. And I was thinking about that today, and I think it's particularly germane relative to the recent events of the COVID virus and this sort of radical, as we discussed one time, you know, it's not, you can't even call it a paradigm shift. It's kind of like a paradigm kick in the ass, you know? So I was wondering if you could just spend a few minutes reflecting. It doesn't have to be sort of an autobiographical type of thing, but just maybe reflecting in terms of where we are now in your view, I mean, yourself, and your own journey.
Well, if I could, I'll maybe start where I kind of started my journey and then end up in the present. My sort of awakening, if you will, as it relates to the issue of animal rights, was frankly when I met my wife, or my wife-to-be at the time. And she was veg, you know, vegan wasn't a word back then, but that's in essence what she was. And just through, you know, respectful discourse, questions, curiosity, inquisitiveness, whatever you want to call it, you know, my wife started to kind of educate me and challenge me to think in ways that I hadn't thought of before. And I always considered myself empathetic, but, you know, I had a little bit of a rude awakening. And it was just over a period of time that I started to, you know, realize that something was amiss. And like most people, I, you know, threw up all the same objections. My cognitive dissonance was no different than anyone else who encounters this topic for the first time, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and so on. And my wife always took the position that, you know, if someone's going to get there, they got to get there on their own. You can't coerce or force anyone into that sort of mindset. She was always there to answer questions. She always had a library of books and videos and DVDs, and we would talk and we would discuss these issues. And there were very philosophical discussions. And then just over time, as the objections fell and I couldn't come up with any more objections, I came to the realization that I think, you know, well, not everybody, but a lot of people come to, and I just couldn't do it anymore. So I had to reconcile my beliefs and my values, and went through a transitory period, and, you know, arrived, I guess I've been vegan now for 13, 14 years. And since then, you know, my wife obviously got involved with running Mercy for Animals here in Canada. She was a very valued member of that organization. They went through some challenges the last few years, as you may or may not know. She left and now is pursuing her doctorate. And I always played a support role for her in those early years. And eventually, I decided I need to, from an advocacy standpoint, or from just for activism, I needed to do something on my own. I needed to find my own niche that I could devote my time and energy to, rather than constantly, like a cat with a laser pointer, always looking for, whatever the topic of the day was that I grew angry about. And Egg Truth, I think, became that. And I tried to find an area that wasn't being replicated by a dozen or 24 other animal rights organizations. I wanted to kind of carve out my own niche. And as a result, I do feel a bit of peace of mind that I've now sort of done this. Because before I was, I guess I was struggling because I needed to focus. And it was that just by focusing on one thing and being as good at it as I possibly could is what I needed to do.
I'd like to just pick up on a couple of things that you said. And one is that I think that what we call the animal rights movement, or whatever umbrella that is really, even though the topic and the concern is focusing on non-humans and non-human nature, that the lens or I should say the medium, and even the lens, is really our human-human relationship and our human-human contract. And so, in a sense, any kind of activity, any kind of thought, any kind of conversation is done in the medium of human relationships, and then scale that back up, right, to, family, community, culture, da-da-da-da-da. So that's one thing I'd like to, maybe you can talk about a little bit. And the other was when you were talking about finding your own path, in other words, your own particular voice. And that really relates to a sense of self. And I think those are two very important ingredients that you touched on. Can you say a little more about those things?
Yeah, I think, how can I describe it? I guess I was in the place that, in terms of animal rights, I found myself in full agreement, acknowledging it all, admiring many, many people in the movement, looking to others for inspiration and motivation. I was there, but I was, I couldn't really consider myself as being effective. And because I was just so fragmented in all the different things that I was doing. And and that was a source of, I guess, frustration for me, because I knew I wasn't really achieving a whole lot. I was angry in the early days, and then I was out there advocating, and I was commenting, and I was whether on, posts on for online news magazines, and then, worked my way into social media and became very active there. And while it helps in terms of articulating and debating and, encountering people who are outside of this vegan bubble we sometimes live in, countering people who have all kinds of objections, and maybe many of them you don't think of, and you struggle sometimes to answer them, but it kind of helps you formulate in your mind how to respond to those. It forces you to think. So, which was great, but I don't know, I was frustrated. And I thought, you know what, looking at what my wife had accomplished with Mercy for Animals, and she was very focused and very integral in that team for many years. I saw that, she, as challenging as it was, and there were moments that were very difficult, watching some of these videos that investigators would upload that she would have to watch hours of it. Sometimes I would come in and I'd get really angry and I would leave, because that tended to be my reaction when I saw videos of animal abuse. She would cry, maybe open a bottle of wine to get through it, and I would get very angry. That's just how I react to injustice. And so, but it just, that's fine. Getting angry is fine, but I needed to find a way to devote my energy and channel that energy positively, so that, hopefully I would have a positive impact. I would genuinely help some animals, and it would give me purpose in life. And it actually has given me peace of mind more than anything else I've done in my life. I can genuinely say that is given me peace of mind. And that has come more so again as I've started Egg Truth and have focused on it and continue to do so. I think that answered your question. There was another component to that. I think the first part I didn't answer.
I mean, basically you answered both in one, and they weren't so much questions as an understanding that the like I said, the kind of a core medium of the animal rights vegan, whatever you want to call it, and it's not unique in that sense, but it is quite challenging relative to other social justice movements, and that is, it's through the medium relationship. And then the notion of this what I see is a transformative element of sense of self. And when you talk about this peace of mind, again, to me, that is reflective. I don't want to put words in your mouth or, say something, but to me, and from a psychological perspective or spiritual perspective, it's embodying. It's another step in terms of embodying acceptance and becoming part of and dissolving the barrier between you and the chicken. I mean, yes. That's just my interpretation. It's a little bit, crude, but to me, and again, maybe, and the reason I'm sort of asking you about this is because I think it's a very important process that's often overlooked in terms of that transition or a transition from reacting and being out here to bringing all of that information in kind of an alchemical way inside to make an internal shift and involving your core self. It's not a core self, reacting. It's a core self reacting, bringing that in, and that's a transformative alchemical process, which, as you say, has given you great peace.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's a pretty good way to describe it, because I kind of look at it in sort of three stages. There was that awakening, mm-hmm. and that coming to accept something that you never questioned before in your entire life. Me, it was up to around the age of 40. And then there's this period of time, which again, in large part was playing more of a support role for my wife at the time in the early days, but just trying to figure out, what it is I needed to do or wanted to do. And even not even being aware sometimes that some of this frustration and these lying awake at night thinking, going to bed thinking about it, waking up thinking about it. And I think I just kind of grew tired of that. And so now I'm more calm, I'm more focused. Again, I have that peace of mind, and I know that I'm actually doing something. And I know that it's having an impact. And knowing that brings, does bring some pleasure, does bring some happiness. As minute as it might be, and as fleeting as it might be at times, because I still get angry. I still see stuff, and I shake my head. I can't, you think you've seen and heard it all, but you haven't. And here we are now in this global pandemic, where if there was ever a teachable moment, this is it. And it's not going to be the last one. But it's a huge, the way I see it, it is a huge opportunity for the animal rights community all around the world to really sit and think and say, okay, we have a chance here to move the goal line. How far, I don't know, but we have a chance because something here now is happening that's affecting every one of the 7.7 billion people on this planet. And it is directly related to our exploitation and abuse of animals, period. And I'm not sure that I have, even myself, okay, what is it now? How do I want to sort of take that and internalize it and then through Egg Truth make that happen? How can I do that? And I think that, while we don't have a central committee of animal rights activists and organizations, if there's ever a time I wish we kind of did, an animal rights cartel, if you would, that we could sit down and plot and strategize globally, it would be awesome because, we could leverage, messaging far more than we could, but obviously that's something, it's not practical. So it's like, okay, what is it we're going to do now as individuals or as organizations to take advantage of this moment to say, okay, we can move the goal line now. How do we make people realize that everyone's suffering and it has to do with our relationship with animals?
Do you see any parallels between this collective moment and your own moments of shifting and transformation? Do you see a parallel there?
I don't know.
Was there anything about your own process that I kind of sense that there might be, because you're phrasing it as an opportunity, and you're seeing this as some kind of an opening. And it seems a little bit reminiscent of what you were describing in terms of your shift, which brought a new perspective internally, brought the externally oriented perspective internally.
Right.
And brought what I would call a realignment. Those are my words. I don't know if that's what I associate when you were saying, I feel a sense of peace, I feel a sense of efficacy. Yes, there's all these other things which are upsetting, but generally speaking, there's a internal track, which is an alignment. Is that something that you think is an element within the quote-unquote animal rights movement? And I wouldn't even say it's limited to the animal rights, the perhaps awakened, which is obviously a broad spectrum.
Yeah. I think there's similarities in the sense that there is an opportunity for me back then, I was seeing things for the first time, and I'll tell you, it wasn't pleasant. There was some shock and awe involved. There was things that really startled me. And I think that if you lose your job, you have no income, you're quarantined at home, your life has been, so seemingly irrevocably altered, that can be quite jarring and shocking as well. And there's some shock and awe in there too. And I think sometimes when, something really gives your head a shake, then that's an opportunity for, shifting people's perspectives. And, I've seen, a number of things out there, some petitions and so on, how effective they are and how effective they're going to be and how much funding they have behind them, I don't know. But there's going to have to be a change that we can't go back to normal. Going back to normal is the problem. And I knew back then that I couldn't go back to normal. I stepped across that that dividing line. And look, I'm not expecting that people are, the world isn't going to go vegan tomorrow, but I have to believe it's causing a lot of people to think. I hope it is, but that's great. People are going to think, but they're going to slip back into their daily routine, and again, they might go back to normal after this is sort of subsided. But I think we have to make sure we don't let that happen some way, shape, or form. And I haven't got it all in my own head yet what that is, but I got to do something again. And now this is an opportunity.
Well, just, this was sort of kind of fast forwarded our webinar because the initial idea behind the webinar was we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? So now that we've had this response, it's kind of like, oh, wow, sort of the empty canvas is in front of us in that sense, in a very real way that touches everyone, at least I'm sure it touches practically every human on the planet. And it's affecting the animals and depending on who they are and their situation in that way. I wanted to, ask you some sort of factoid type things. Talk about what being vegan is. I mean, it's used in a colloquial sense. It's used in sort of a formal sense of someone who doesn't use animal products, lifestyle. But can you talk about it? I'm sort of putting you through the paces of psychology. I guess that was my hat this morning. What is really being vegan, or engaging in veganism as such, as an experience, and as a sense of self? I don't know if these questions are resonant with you or not.
Yeah.
More of the internal expression of veganism.
It removed myself from the center of everything or daily life. Up to that point, again, that period in which, when I met my wife and we'd go have these lengthy debates and discussions and conversations, and I'd read books and watch videos and so on. I was always kind of, relying on the things, material things for, I don't know, I know it sounds maybe simplistic, but, happiness. I thought most people's lives was supposed to be focused on, acquiring wealth, prosperity, having nice things, doing the kind of things you wanted to do, pursue some passions or hobbies in life, relationships. But that always places yourself at the center of it, all considerations. It's very, I'm not sure if egocentric is the right word, but that's kind of, where I lived my entire life, from a little kid to a teenager, certainly a teenager, a young adult, and, into middle years. And maybe I'm still selfish to some degree. I'm sure I am. But a big part of my waking thoughts and even my sleeping thoughts are not focused on me. Whether it's particular species, chicken or whatever, doesn't matter. It's just thinking about someone else. And it's the process of thinking about someone else and thinking about how do I reduce suffering for an individual or for a large number of individuals, removes yourself from the center of everything and replaces it with others. And to me, maybe it's cliche, and maybe things that are cliche for a reason, but that seems to be, the $1 million question and answer is, how do you find happiness and peace of mind? Well, there it is. Do something for somebody else. Even if you don't know them, it doesn't matter. Maybe it's even more genuine if you don't know them. I don't know, but that is really, for me, internally, that's what kind of veganism really is at the end of the day. And like you say, yeah, it's people use it when they're talking about diet and et cetera, but it's really about just doing the right thing, and justice. That's it. I interestingly, the last couple of weeks I was watching on Netflix, Who Killed Malcolm X?
Oh.
And I learned a little bit about Malcolm X's life and history a few years ago, and I found it very interesting, some of his transition, where he went from promoting or advocating for the use of violence can be justified and maybe necessary at times, to promoting nonviolence. He sort of came full circle and kind of was joined up with Martin Luther King in terms of that philosophy. And looking at his journey, he seemed to find that peace of mind as well, that nonviolence and that style of advocacy was really the solution. And even though he feared for his life, and he even knew and predicted that his demise was near, it didn't matter. He had crossed that Rubicon, and I think that's where he found peace. And certainly, no doubt, would hope that would be his legacy, as it is Martin Luther King. So, and Gandhi and others have mimicked this, not mimicked it, but have forged this path. And veganism is very much that similar path. I don't know if that's hyperbolic or inappropriate or not applicable. I don't know, but it resonated with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's that notion, you were talking about alleviating suffering, but it's also in the sense of putting the joy, another person's joy and life force before your own, So, yeah. Like with your beautiful Great Danes, right? There is the notion of, rescue and alleviating suffering in whatever way. But behind that is really, a commitment and deriving joy from being able to facilitate someone's, be able to engage fully in life and be all who they can be or whatever.
Right.
Which I think is a very exciting thing. And that's a very different thing in terms of decentering of self. So not to sound technical, but, I don't think animals have egos. I mean, I think that's kind of a construct from Western civilization that,
yeah.
Whatever you want to call it, the Western tradition, the ego, which has meaning in terms of what we're doing. But I don't really think animals have egos in that sense. And so it's that kind of dissolution of that ego in that way.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to do is I don't want to overlook egg truth. Can you talk about egg truth and perhaps tie that into, this arc and how that came to fruition and sparked in you?
Sure. Having decided that I needed to focus on something, the next question was, well, what is that? What does that look like? What is it going to be? And I think, in part, some of the experiences that my wife had at Mercy for Animals in looking at poultry, looking at egg-laying hens and birds raised for meat, I really became increasingly aware of the degree of suffering there, the prolonged suffering, and the horrors that from the entire process, from the commercial hatcheries right through to the slaughter process, was really I don't know. It just impacted me, I think, in ways that other forms didn't, or not quite as much would be a better way to say it. And, I do recall, and look, I mean, unlike Liz, who has birds and knows birds and can comment on their behavior in ways that I can't. I don't have a chicken. I haven't rescued chickens. I have had minimal experience with chickens. And at first I thought, well, is that a problem? Should I become like a, Dr. Karen Davis? Should I be out there being a poultry expert to be an advocate? And I thought, no, it doesn't matter. if this is an issue of justice, you don't have to know or have personal relationships with the victims to advocate for them. They're victims. And so, but my wife is president of the board for Happily Ever Esther Farm Sanctuary. And I go down there. I've done their website and Esther the Wonder Pig, and I've been very involved with them, with Steve and Derek down there. And I was down there, I think it was a few years ago, and they have rescue chickens. And I remember holding one of the chickens, and I couldn't, they were so fragile. They felt so fragile to me, like a little baby. When you hold a little baby, you're supposed to hold the head, and they're so fragile, and you're fearful of dropping them. I kind of felt this way about holding this one particular chicken. His name was Richard, and he was just fragile. And I thought, the innocence and the vulnerability of this little being, to have the might and power of billion-dollar industries and large manufacturing facilities and trucks and hanging slaughter lines and cutting blades and all of this Frankenstein-esque macabre methodology, the system of killing. And I just kind of realized that, wow, there is no greater example of might and weakness that I could possibly think of. And it just inspired me, I guess, to pick that path. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to use my creative skills. I'll always remember, and I can't remember the author's name. Maybe somebody could help me. He wrote, Green is the New Red. Anyone know his name? No? Can't remember his name, but he wrote this book about how, the U.S. government, the FBI are looking at...
Is that Derek Jensen?
No. His name escapes me at the moment. But anyways, he was at an animal rights convention, and he said, if you want to get involved, if you want to be active, take a skill that you already have, and use it. And even use the example of, if you're a web designer, help some animal rights organizations build some nice websites, So there was always, that was his advice. And I thought, yeah, okay. So what did I do? The first thing I did was build a website. I wasn't even sure how I wanted to populate the website with content. I figured I'll figure that out afterwards. Because if I think this through too much, I'm not going to end up doing it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get into the creative aspect of it. Then I'm going to go out and populate the website with information that in itself was another journey of research and learning. And then I decided, okay, what's my messaging going to be? There's Open Wing Alliance that all these animal rights groups together all around the world are focusing on cage-free initiatives. And, I was uncomfortable with that for a variety of reasons. And I thought, okay, what is it what's my message? What can I don't want to duplicate what everybody else is doing. Because everybody's out there with a donate button looking to, they need to generate revenue. And I don't blame them for that. But, if you're going to seek donations, you got to have a clear message, a clear action plan, and you got to show results, because donors want to see what you're doing with their money. Rightfully so. And so, if you're going to have deliverables, they better be achievable, and you need to be able to talk about that at the end of the year when you send out your annual report or however you convey the message to donors. But I thought, okay, at first, I don't know if I even want to go there eventually, but I just want to keep the small, nimble, and flexible. And I thought, okay, I'm going to promote egg-free, not cage-free. And I'm going to be very explicit about it. It's a simple message. The movement has changed. The movement evolves just like every other social justice cause. And I think you got to kind of take stock every few years, reevaluate and say, okay, should we change the message? Should we be focusing on other things? So I decided that that was going to be the message that I advocate for. And, be sure that as I come up against the backyard hen people, the organic farming people, and everyone who thinks there's nothing wrong with any of those things, I needed to make sure that I knew how to engage with them on that level. So, and like anything, it's an ongoing process, and I continue to learn and get better at it. I'm really glad that I did it, because I learned so much, and I found advocates and people who helped me with research that I never would have thought would have been the people who would.
It's Will Potter. I looked it up. I couldn't stand it.
What's that? I'm sorry?
Will Potter is the author of
Will Potter.
Recently Read.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, Will Potter. That's right.
I couldn't stand it.
Yeah. So, yeah, he was the one that kind of, I had a little light bulb go off. I think it was 2014, 2015. And he said, just leverage your skills and abilities that you already have in some way in the movement to do something. And that's what I did.
And that's kind of a theme that we've heard from a number of guests on this program is and again, this harks back to what we were talking about earlier, is to align this, internal sense of self and mission with the work that one's doing. In other words, that it's an individual, and there's so many aspects, and it's sort of like a mosaic. That there's bringing all of this in. And these are all the elements of what I think that is, we're recreating a new human compact, what our relationships are with each other.
Right.
And all of these things, is really a media for talking to each other, and this gets down to how are we going to live, as Peter Singer said, how are we going to live?
Right.
And do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, you talked about this notion of we should have an animal rights cartel. It's appealing, I think, to some people in many ways.
Yeah.
But, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we are definitely catapulted into this liminal space, liminal meaning between which and whatever. And there is no we in a sense of a homogeneous for a number of reasons. One, there's an individual, and there's all these, the humans on this planet are in very degrees of being able to change their material lives. We'll put it that way.
Right.
That's radical.
Right.
It's a radical thing. So there's a kind of a we, which is using the internet that, has capacities to have these dialogues, and then there are individuals who just, they're really starving or dying, and in various stages of and maybe we are too, but in the sense of that things are very much dynamic in terms of human society and how it will settle.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any thoughts about that in terms of like I said, you did mention the cartel, but how don't tell your wife.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? This is, like I said, what does the new future look like? What are some things are there some images, some visions? That was, like I said, the original idea of this program, was to get some conversation on saying, how are we going to live? How should we kind of live? Or what are some visual and ethical goalposts? We stop factory farming, we stop animal exploitation. There's some concrete things on, people have different ideas of what we do with domesticated animals. But do you see, how would you describe how you think that we might have an image, or what would that image be that we might work toward in a very concrete way, knowing that as we get closer to that goal, it may change? Is there some kind of image of living? Do you see this?
I don't know. I confess that I think about it sometimes, but I guess I tend to, in a weird way, not force myself to think about it too much,
Mm-hmm.
because it is such a to enter into that area of almost I don't want to call it prophecy, but to envision what that might look like, I really try to at times think about it, and then I kind of just go, nah, I need to just, again, bring myself back to stay focused on what I'm doing. And I mean, if you were to ask me, okay, you've got a crystal ball, what do you think might be in 30, 40 years, what things might look like? I would be foolish to dismiss the idea that things like clean meat won't play a role. I think it will. I think technology is going to end up reducing a lot of suffering. And whether we think that's a good thing or not, or whether not that reducing suffering is a good thing or not, but that clean meat itself is, how does that different from veganism? And they are different. And
can you define, some people may not be familiar with the term clean meat. Can you define what clean meat is?
that is where they use stem cells of actual animal cells to grow meat in a controlled clinical environment. It's often been described as, or akin to, brewing. The Good Food Institute is an example of an organization that's set up to not only help organizations who are looking to grow plant-based food alternatives, but also to help foster the growth of clean meat companies, and even trying to marry capital, people, wealthy individuals and institutions with money with these companies to help solve the food supply issue. And they obviously leverage the climate change and the environmental aspect as well. But so in the animal rights movement, it's often seen as really capitalism rather than animal advocacy. And to a great extent, that is true. But it's going to factor in whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, whether you'd eat clean meat if it were available or not. It's going to potentially impact in a way that I don't think any of us can predict right now. So that kind of, on one hand, like anything, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, yeah, that could potentially reduce the suffering of hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of animals. But on the flip side, that still doesn't, resolve the issue of human relationship with non-human animals. Mm-hmm. People can just then say, well, I love meat. I'm going to eat meat. I love the taste of meat. I can't tell the difference. The price is the same. So I'm just I'll opt for the clean meat because, it helps the environment and so on. But on the weekend, I'm still going to go hunting, or I'm still going to go to the zoo, or I'm going to stop by that roadside circus, or I'm still going to wear leather or whatever else. But again, some of those products might be replaced one day as well too. So I think we're going to see a mixed bag. I think I guess I'm talking more from a aspirational aspect, but I hope that this paradigm shift is going to evolve. It's going to be generational, I think, like most social justice causes. A new generation will look back and see certain things as being, a bit of a head shake for them. So I think that there's going to be a movement certainly in that direction, paralleled with other things like clean meat and plant-based foods, to the point where so many people are not going to be able to discern any difference. And the price, people obviously, unfortunately, will still pay for the cheaper option, regardless of whether it's not cruelty-free. So I kind of see this, 20, 30, 40 years from now, where I don't think we'll still achieve our goal. I think that's a much, much longer timeline or horizon. But I think we're going to be in a better place than we are now. It just won't be the utopia that we think and wish will happen. I think that's still a very long way off. I'm not sure if that answers your question, or maybe I even avoided it somewhat, because I, I can opine what I would like to happen, but then is that what you want, or would you prefer something more realistic?
Whatever. I mean, this is where, like I said, the whole point of the series is just to bring conversation up of various topics,
Okay.
in that way, which is really important. I like I said, I've said this earlier that I feel like there has, at least I'm not in that circle, where I have felt that there is enough discussion on where are we going,
Right.
and I mean, there doesn't have to be an agreement, but just bringing that into the conversation is
Mm-hmm.
very important. So, for example, what you're bringing up, in parallel, what's happening is that, again, we talked about this earlier, is there, who are we? There isn't a homogeneous human, so we're talking about the indigenous people, for example, indigenous humans who are largely left out of the global conversation of these kinds of technologies and solutions.
Right.
And so, and that's changing. That's changing. But those are all the threads. No, there's no right or wrong. It's just to bring these conversations up. That was excellent. That was great. Well, I should probably stop because I could keep asking you a million questions. But was there anything else you would like to add before we open it up to the Q&A?
I don't think so. I think the Q&A probably will do that in itself. I would just encourage everyone to, obviously, I'm going to do a plug here. Go to egg-truth.com, go to our social media channels, share, watch, read. I'd like to bring people's attention to a segment or section on our website called Eggs in Our Health.
Mm-hmm.
And a quick, interesting anecdote about that particular page on our website. I hesitated writing it because I'm not a health expert. I'm not a nutritionist. So I sought out some sources for that. And I sought out an individual who I had found online through his writings to the World Health Organization, his speaking at various conferences and international media. And he was his name is Dr. J. David Spence. He's a professor of neurology and clinical pharmacology at the Robarts Research Institute at Western University, London, Canada. And he was a fierce critic of the egg industry and cholesterol research. And not a vegan, not a vegetarian, not an animal rights person. I sought him out specifically because I wanted a source that would at least be perceived as unbiased as possible. And not only was he a wealth of information, and I had to delve through many, many of his papers and research and studies that he provided me. But interestingly, he also ended up providing me a lot of links and videos and whatnot to Dr. Michael Greger from Nutrition Facts, who was a source that I initially tried to avoid because, he's kind of a plant-based guy, and, the criticism out there will always be, oh yeah, you PCRM, Dr. Greger, all of these, they're all plant-based, they're all like crazy animal rights people, your sources are biased. And I wanted to sort of sidestep that any way that I could. And apart from the animal welfare aspect, the health aspect, the human health aspect is something that I've really, and it's not a subject that a lot of people are interested in, and maybe I'm one of the few, but I will say that as a result of what I learned, and much of that is on that page, courtesy of Dr. Spence and others, including Dr. Greger. Ultimately, I couldn't avoid not putting him on there because Dr. Spence had, like I said, had referred me there. But I came to realize that what the food industry, in particular the egg industry, does is very insidious because they dominate nutrition research unlike any other single source out there. There is very little independent nutrition research going on in the world. Universities and other private for-profit facilities are always looking for funding, and no one has more financial resources than the food industry. So studies are designed specifically for a predetermined outcome, and when the results aren't what they want, it gets shelved, and the food industry promotes those that tend to look favorable upon their particular commodity. The problem is that this is so insidious, and they have infiltrated everything from public health organizations, the American Cancer Society, the Heart and Stroke Foundation, you name it. They have infiltrated these organizations and provide so much funding that, in addition to the incalculable harm that they inflict upon animals, they're inflicting a lot of harm on humans by encouraging them to eat more of their product this year than they did last year, despite the negative impact it's going to have on human health. And there are very few industries out there other than, narco dictators who are out there trying to kill their customers. The food industry is actually doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So with that said, I wanted to get that in there because that's a big one for me.
I have to ask one question since I'm still on.
Sure.
Do you ever get any intersection between the human pro-life movement and the egg industry? Not really. Interestingly, I did have an encounter, a personal encounter. Last year, I did an outdoor advertising campaign, a print campaign, and a social media advertising campaign that focused on Toronto to just create awareness about egg truth and the plight of hens. And I was at one of the things that we did was some street marketing with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and we did a Cube of Truth. And in Dundas Square, which is Toronto's version of Times Square, hundreds of thousands of people, just video screens and outdoor advertising everywhere. But on the same street corner we were was a religious order protesting with a microphone and having conversations. And it was a purely Christian perspective, trying to convince Muslims and others that, the Christian God was the one true God. A gentleman that was there protesting came over and we started chatting. And he asked me that question about, where do animal rights people stand on the issue of, abortion and the pro-life perspective. And I said, look, I can't speak for the movement. I can't speak for anybody else here. I can only speak for myself. And I said, I'll turn that question around at you and say, if you see life in its most rudimentary form as being sacred, and boy, I don't even know if I want to get into the subject, but you asked, then, it is certainly undeniable that life in its rudimentary form, whether you believe life begins at conception or some are shortly thereafter, or even before conception, as some do. Certainly animals are living sentient creatures that have the capacity to feel pain and to suffer and so on. I said, how do you reconcile your reverence for that rudimentary life when you have conscious, aware, living beings that feel pain? Why do you not give the same reverence? Or why is the scales tilted in such a inequitable way? And of course the answer was predictable, in that humans are different. We are imbued with a soul. We are created in God's image. It was this subjugation of all other life on earth except ours, and all this life is here for us. And I frankly didn't want to spend a lot of time, debating this guy. We had a respectful discourse, and I had to get back to showing people
maceration video, try to, a little bit of shock and awe to get people to realize what's going on. And I confess that I very much struggle with that topic. And when I encounter people from the religious side, they sometimes seem to be the hardest to get through to, which I find perplexing. I can't think of a better way to honor God's creatures than by not confining them, transporting them, and torturing them. But that's just me, maybe. And as a really militant atheist, I I also kind of have to be careful. I almost have to just, step back in those types of conversations, because that's probably not an area that I'm going to be particularly good at. So I'll just kind of stick to kind of what I think I know I do well, and that is an area I need to improve on. I have to have a better way to engage on that front. Really.
It's not an easy one.
What's that?
It's not easy. I mean, any of the encounters when there are, seemingly very, separate and sort of antithetical views. It's not easy to be able to find, that common ground, to be able to dialogue in that way.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah, and I genuinely try to be respectful. Mm-hmm. I don't, shaming and yelling at people is not effective advocacy. Melanie Joy has written at length about that. Dr. Melanie Joy, she's written so eloquently and has spoken about that subject many, many times. And I try to kind of follow that model. I struggle sometimes. But I've, I kind of, I got to work on that.
Well, I think we're all faced with that, particularly now with sort of this new set of parameters that we find ourselves in the world, because we're having to sort of reconnect and redefine our human-human relationships.
Right.
And there's an interdependency and an evaluation, which I think for many people we've not had to be. We don't have to enter into that ground, but now we're entering into a ground where we have to talk about these and negotiate and resolve these things internally as well as interpersonally. So, well, thank you. I'll turn this over to the masses.
Thank you both. That was an enlightening interview, and I know I have a few questions. But before we turn it over to Q&A, I was just going to do a quick plug for next month's webinar. So next month, we're going to have Molly Flanagan, and she's going to be joining us on June 7th. And we're actually going to be meeting an hour later than usual at 1 p.m. Pacific. So we hope we'll see you all there. So with that.